who have demonstrated personal leadership in situations that are often, about disruptive change, that are about having to reinvent oneself, having to seize opportunities, and having to create spaces, domains, markets that are not there. And so we call this series the Uncommon Leader. And we are basically bringing up stories that of exceptional people and sharing the extraordinary lessons that they have to share. So that's really the background to the Uncommon Leader series. And I must offer Naren's disclaimer here. I must repeat it. It's there in the invitation, but I will repeat it. When I reached out to Naren and I said, Naren, we'd like you to be our guest on this conversation show, he said, I'm neither an uncommon leader, nor do I have any wisdom to share. So we will have a conversation, AVIS, is what he said. And I'm so very grateful to you that you could be here for this conversation today. How do we, yeah, I think it's on. Yeah. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for, first of all, thinking that I might be worth your while and, worth the time of so many people assembled here. And thank you for having me over.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's my pleasure.
So Naren is a business consultant, pretty much like Vani and me, and we operate in similar spaces. Both our approaches have a certain, this is my understanding, have a certain spiritual quality to the way we approach the idea of leadership, change management, behavioral transformation in organizations. So that is perhaps one thread that connects us to each other. I haven't known Naren until MH370 went missing. So it's an acquaintance that has developed, if I may say, into a strong bond of empathy between both of us for each other and our families. I reached out to him around the time that my book was being launched. I've written a book, Fall Like a Rose Petal, A Father's Lessons on How to Be Happy and Content While Living Without Money. And so in 2014, when the book was being launched, I wanted Naren to be the first person to receive a copy of the book. We didn't want celebrity launches as an idea, we wanted people, fellow voyagers, like me and Vani, to come up and receive it, but his dates were not available, he was traveling. And since then, we've been in touch on email, and then we met last year, and it's a relationship that's grown. So I'm happy that you're here, though what we're going to talk about is a deeply, deeply personal story. And so I'm grateful that you have stepped up to share it with us. I know it's going to be something that you are going to have to revisit as we get into this conversation. But I want all of us to appreciate the fact that here is a gentleman whose wife of 25 years, Chandrika, was on MH370 that went missing on the 8th of March 2014. It's something that all of us can never comprehend. Sitting here, we cannot comprehend it because we live in a very logical, rational, measurable, data-driven environment, and we are living satiated, satisfied with instant gratification. Instant gratification, now you send a WhatsApp to somebody, you can get a reply. And if you don't get a reply, then you get tense and you call up that person and say that I called you, I sent a WhatsApp to you, give me a reply. What's your reply? What do you do in a situation when the whole world does not know where an entire plane has gone missing? And no force on this planet can track it down. So ladies and gentlemen, this is why I'd like us to pause for a second before I start the conversation and appreciate what not just Naren could have gone through, and his daughter Meghna, and we have Bharti, Naren's sister, and the family could have gone through, but the number of families that are connected with MH370 is missing could have gone through. We cannot even comprehend. But what we're going to try and do through this conversation is understand what could have been the thought process and try and see if there are some connections between what Naren has to share and what we can take away from that experience for our own learning. So it's just a very humble effort. There are no right or wrong approaches here. It's just a conversation. Did I set the context right, Naren?
Absolutely. I just wanted to underline that from a fellow voyager, I've become an uncommon individual over 2 years.
Right. Yes, that's true. So that's true. Yeah, that's. I think he's highlighting the fact that from being a fellow voyager, he's become an uncommon leader to be able to share his story. But I think you're also saying that with a lot of kind of sentiment of am I really qualified to speak here? I think that must be riding on your head. But as I said, this is just a conversation. It's just a sharing, and I'll pick up the threads that are relevant. Okay.
Just to say my piece, I'm quite happy to share. I learn as I share as well. And there are things that I yet haven't figured out. Maybe in the conversation some bulbs start burning. So I look forward to this conversation personally.
Fantastic. So as we normally do, like we did last time when we had Neerja here, this conversation will go on for about 40 to 50 minutes. And then we open the floor for an interaction with the audience. So please keep your mobiles on silent or switched off mode, just to enable that everyone is able to stay engaged. And I'll come to you with the questions from your side by about closer to 7 o'clock. So my first question for you, Naren, is obviously going back to that first week, let us say, or the first few weeks. We all talk about disruptive change in life. You actually have dealt with it. How did you move from uncertainty to a certain sense of grudging, painful acceptance of a reality? Do you want to walk us through those sentiments? How difficult was it? What was your thinking at that time?
Okay, let me try. Sure. March 8th, through me, my family, and actually families of 238 other families, into a zone of uncertainty. I don't think the areas of uncertainty have completely evaporated. There remain pretty much many questions that remain unaddressed, unanswered, and perhaps never will be. And so we are left with the prospect of remaining with the questions and being content with the answers that we choose to give ourselves. So perhaps there are going to be no answers that come from somebody else outside, but just a way in which that we frame a certain response to these questions that help us to carry on day after day for the rest of our lives. So that's fundamentally, I think, something that all of us are having to do. And I think it's perhaps true of many of you here as well. So it's not just about my situation. All of us are thrown into circumstances of a similar kind. And not always do we have our answers, but we still have to give provisional answers that will help us to carry on. So as it was with me, the first couple of months seemed like a period where we might still be able to reach a reasonable conclusion to this absence of the aircraft, to the search, and if not passengers alive, at least some answers as to what might have been their fate. Yeah. My own sense was that after the first few days, and I have been a long-time viewer of many series on air crashes, ironically.
Oh, is it right?
Yeah, you know, there's a whole series on air crash investigation, for instance. I've seen perhaps almost all the episodes before that. And so,
out of natural interest?
I like anything to do with aircrafts. I like anything to do with space travel.
Okay.
So anytime there's a spacecraft launch, I would perhaps grab whatever was the video and watch it. So there was a certain interest, there was a certain curiosity that I anyway had with planes, with spacecraft, with space travel, and so on. And maybe it's a macabre interest, but I did watch a whole series on air crash investigation. So whatever that I had seen, I understood that after the first few days, if there was no news, the probability that we will have news that will make us get back to being one happy family again is not likely.
Okay.
Yeah. So no matter how one framed it, partly to sort of postpone the inevitable, or because out of sensitivities that were around other families and how they looked at it, I would say that, we will keep our optimism up, or that as time passes by, the probability of a happy outcome becomes closer and closer to zero, and frame it in these terms. But essentially, it was very evident that after the first week or 10 days, when there was no news of where the aircraft disappeared, there was no hijack demand, there was no news of a shoot down, there was no news of a terrorist act that we thought was credible, I realized that it's going to have only one end, and that is that my wife's never going to come back. Now, knowing this is one thing, or knowing here in the head is one thing, but it took a while to actually experience the fact of loss, the fact of absence, the fact of a tragedy that has befallen the family, and to live with the reality of somebody's absence hour to hour, day after day, and up to this point, more than a couple of years. So, not a day passes that one doesn't think of her, one doesn't miss her. I'm quite actively, pursuing whatever is happening on the search. But the question also begs an answer. What's the point of being engaged with the search when the outcome's already actually known in a way?
Right.
But nonetheless, I think it's just the nature of the mind that when there are questions that are nagging and they don't yet find a settlement, it keeps coming back, much like a ghost that never kind of gets off your back. Mm-hmm. So, if I were to go back to the question that you started with, I think the first couple of months were quite difficult. In some ways, it was actually pumped to the adrenaline, actually, because we were constantly trying to think about what might happen. We were not so much in touch with actually the fact of a deep sense of loss at that time. It was more as, trying to figure out what next, what's going to happen. The cops used to keep knocking. There was a time when it would seem as if we were under suspicion rather than us being at the receiving end of a tragedy.
Oh, God. Right.
Because there was the CBCID, there was the Interpol, there was IB. They would come and ask questions. So I think the first couple of months just went as a blur in many ways. It was much after that when a whole lot of people who would visit, who would stay, who would drop in, started thinning down. And you were left to deal with 1,650 square feet of your house. Just you, that's just me and my mother, and a whole lot of furniture. That the reality of a family member, a dear one, who you've lived your life with for 25 years or so, or close to that, the fact that that person is perhaps never going to come back, and the need to have to start thinking about what life lies ahead that's the point when it becomes very difficult. And it was very difficult for me.
Thank you for that very personal sharing. We were really moved by what you had to say. I want to pick up one important point here for all our benefit. We all seek answers, and in life there are sometimes no answers. And how do you deal with the nagging questions when you know for sure what the answer is, in a way? How do you deal with those nagging questions? I think that's a very, very important takeaway here. And he talked about the mind, the nature of the mind, and it's very important for us to understand that the life that we have has an expiry date. All of us are living our lives with a surefire expiry date coming up. Now, the nature in which the expiration will happen may vary from story to story to story, but there is no denying or escaping that end point. And so the mind needs to be anchored through some mechanism, some practice, so that you are able to deal with the upheavals that life will throw at you. Now, in Naren's case, it's a personal loss. In our cases, in different stories of people sitting over here, it could be a relationship that's ended, it could be a health challenge, it could be, in our case, it's a completely bizarre business loss scenario, and so on. We could be dealing with myriad scenarios, but the anchoring the mind is something extremely important. And that brings me to the next part. So when you reach that point, so the 2 months went away in a blur, and then you and your mom and home, how did you pick up the threads of your life, and how much did you have to anchor yourself in order to help Meghna, your daughter, cope with this? So there was a parental responsibility, which I'm sure when Chandrika been in your place, she would have dealt with it equally stoically. So that had to be done, and you had your own issues to address as someone who's missing a companion. So how did you put these two together and bring in the third element of your professional life to move on? Was that easy, that process, and was it trial and error? How did you do it?
Okay. I pick up many parts that you're trying to bring together. Let me try and
please.
Go over as you asked. First of all, the 2-3 things that helped me. One is something that I believed in, which is that none of us are particularly favored or abandoned, and it's really up to us to make whatever we wish to make of our own lives. All of us have privileges, whether we are aware of it or not, and all of us have our deficits that we have to live with. So that was a belief which I think was fairly central to dealing with how things turned out. That's one. The second thing was, call it taking a philosophical stance, but I think this is nothing new. It's what everybody knows, that living and dying are inevitable elements of the cycle of life. And my wife and me have often talked about it as we would take a walk every evening. Mm-hmm. And we would no sooner talk about a plan of what we would perhaps do in the year ahead, and soon enough either she or I would slip in saying, who knows, tomorrow morning we may not be there, maybe the next hour I'm gone. So how can we be sure? So this idea that one can never be really certain about what is to happen, and that therefore it brought, I think, a much greater attention to what one is with, what's on the plate at this moment, at this point in time, and basically saying all that I can take responsibility for, all that I can do is to act now, act for now, and in doing what I'm doing now, I have the possibility of shaping a future. Yeah, there's no future that is going to come and visit upon me as I would wish it to be. The only thing that I can do, and the only thing that's under my control, is really what I choose to do. So that's the second thing that I thought was quite helpful in the sense it brought attention back to the realities of existence as they stare at me day after day, and the need to respond to them. Yeah, that's the second thing. I think the third thing that I found was that about 3-4 months down the road, I realized that actually I was struck by a certain trauma of the event, which I had not actually been in touch with. I had not actually recognized. I had not actually acknowledged. And it seemed to show up in different ways, in the way that I was able to apply my mind or to concentrate or to respond to tasks that were sort of popping up every once in a while. And perhaps in a computer language, it seemed as if my hard disk had deliberately slowed down.
Your hard disk?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's almost as if there's only so much that it could take, and there's only so much speed at which it can respond. And when I recognized this, it worried me briefly. But again, what helped me, I think, is just the fact that I said, okay, this seems to be the case. This is how it seems to be. So no point fretting about it. And it's almost as if some capacity had got locked away or had been lost. There was some leakage of certain capacities. So I said, that's the case, it is so. Now, maybe something else opens up. And I think what really happened for me was that I started writing. And it was a passion, but it was never invested in over the years. And it opened up for me a way of examining what is happening to me and offered me a language to express myself, which I found difficult in conversation. So every once in a while, I would sort of sit down, look at a blank screen, and I would start, and I would write. And some I would share, and some I would say I will share whenever I feel I'm ready for it. But essentially, so that's...
Did it work as therapy, writing? Did it?
I think writing did
therapeutic?
It did 2-3 things. One, of course, it was, I think, partly therapeutic. Second, I think it helped me to clarify to myself what was it that was actually happening to me. To sift through sometimes a whole lot of confusion, both about the event, about what is happening subsequent to the event in terms of the search, and what is happening to me in terms of my own inner reality and the way that I was responding. So it offered me an opportunity to take a step back and to look at both what is happening within and what is happening in my interface with people and the world at large. So perhaps I lost something and I gained something. Yeah, the loss and gain is not the language of what we're talking about, but I suppose you get what I'm saying, that there are latent interests and latent capacities which perhaps given a trigger come alive and find their own expression. The fourth thing I think was that I think I understood that if life and death were a reality of existence, then celebration has to accompany mourning. Because
that's a beautiful point.
Yeah, because or perhaps the act of mourning includes and necessarily extends to the act of celebration of a life that's gone by. Yeah, and in some ways it helped to sort of revisit what our collective journey had been over the years, and okay, so it is painful. It brought more acutely the fact of our absence, the reality of our absence. But people don't just live in flesh and blood in our lives. They also live in our memories. And in how we have internalized them in ourselves and in the ways in which they have become part and parcel of ourselves. So, so in some ways, what I saw was that many facets of her lived on perhaps through me. What she stood for, what she lived for, what was important to her, what was dear to her, were not altogether separate from what it was that was meaningful and significant to me as well. And part of, in a sense, keeping her presence through her absence was to actually keep alive some of the things that were valuable to both of us. So as far as my daughter was concerned, it was tough. She has taken many facets, many attributes that I often use to describe myself. Mm-hmm. One of them, of course, I believe that she is as stoic as I am. And you used the word stoic and you took it away from me. So she's quite stoic. She, I believe, and perhaps maybe I'm just a proud parent, I think her understanding and her capacity to absorb is well beyond her years. She's 20, which is not exactly, too young, but she's not too old either. And she has a difficulty, I think, in also talking about how she feels. Perhaps she's groping to really understand what exactly is happening. And oftentimes what we would do is I would talk about how I'm feeling. Yeah? And she would almost in resonance reciprocate and almost talk about how she's feeling, which was not exactly very different from actually what I was saying. And in this process, what we did to each other, did for each other, was a way of sharing something a lot more intimate, a lot more private, and find a way to actually talk about the things that bothered us. I'm not quite sure whether she's well over the fact of her loss, the fact of my wife's loss, the fact of her mother's loss. But I was very keen that she get back to a routine. A routine is a very, what shall we say? A routine is a very helpful device to stay functional and to set yourself time when this is your private time and your personal time, rather than to cloud the entire day in a haze of unsorted feeling. So the routine, firstly, of getting back to college and the act of having to attend classes and to focus on the assignments and the exams and all that comes with college life, I think perhaps has also helped her. All I could do was to say, no question is unwelcome. No time is, barred as far as our conversation is concerned. No subject is taboo. No expression in any form is ruled out. So just simply being available is, I think, all that I could do. Beyond that, I would just have to trust that she has the wisdom, she has the capacity, she has the sagacity, she has the resilience to not lock the past away, but to take it forward in a way that is meaningful, that is integral to who she is. I think that's, I don't know if I've answered your question.
I think you covered so much, just sharing that entire process. It's again deeply personal, and I'm going to make it a little more broader for people to hold here. Leadership, Sun Tzu, the Chinese military strategist who lived in the 4th century BC, leadership, he says, is knowing yourself. And what a cathartic phase puts you through is it brings you close to who you are. And if you delve a little bit into what Naren had to share, his process of dealing with the entire trauma as he defined it. Initially it was all a blur, and then begins the phase where you are coming to terms at a deeply personal level with your own sense of loss and grief. And that moment, that phase is actually the phase which unlocks the ability to realize yourself. And in his case, it was writing. More to provide himself the clarity. I also use writing a lot of the time, even to define a problem, even to define how I'm feeling. It might be stuff that will be here. I may be dealing with it every day, but when I write it down and I look at it and I read it back to myself, I get more clarity, and I actually drop a few elements away, saying these are not what I'm dealing with. So you got to figure out, for some people it will be music, for some people it will be a swim, for some people it will be a round of golf, for some people it will be writing, some people it will be dancing. So you got to figure out what it is. And I'm going back to the point, it's not the process as much as it is the feeling of understanding and knowing yourself better. The second point that I'm picking up there is from a leadership point of view. I think as a parent, we all of us are parents here in some way, surely. We have children at different stages of life in our lives. I think a parental responsibility is leadership. You have to, obviously we all try to inculcate the right values and give our children the right direction. But at a time when there is a crossroad, when there is a lack of clarity, I think one of the most important things a parent can do is to have an honest conversation. And I think I loved the way you described it, saying no, nothing is taboo, no time is a bad time, and no form of expression is right or wrong. Just express yourself. I think that's very, very, very important. Many times Vani and I are asked, how did you let your children deal with the, and there are no comparisons, between Naren's story and our story or your story. There are no comparisons. I'm just telling you that how much having those conversations, and we continue to have those conversations, and not all the conversations go to reach a level of clarity or closure on issues. They don't. But the conversations and keeping them going are very important. And there's something that Naren didn't talk about, but I can feel it, and I think we all go through it at different points in time, but we don't define it this way, which is when he said his hard disk slowed down. His ability to concentrate was lesser than before, and he was dealing with the absence and trying to celebrate the presence. So there was a physical dichotomy somewhere there, and yet there was a opportunity to kind of live with those memories, right, and feel energized about them. In medical science, they call it depression. It's not that all of us get that label that we are depressed, but we go through a phase when we don't get what we want, and when we don't get what we want, we are depressed, and that slows us down. And the part of life where you actually indulge in trying to understand and know yourself, when you reach the point that there is no point in investing any more time in feeling this way, you snap out of it. You begin to feel different. So if you have ever encountered this phase of your hard disk slowing down, of your pace of thought, or your ability to perform on whatever role, whatever task, whatever you're doing, it can be something as simple as you might be a painter, an artist, on the side and you might be painting, or you could be a fantastic cook in the kitchen and you don't feel like it, then you got to try and understand what is it that you are thinking about that's pulling you down, that's depressing you, and try to use the same process that he used to kind of snap out of it. And of course, one important point towards the end that he touched about is the process of life. You have to learn to trust the process of life. Everything, all our life stories are going according to a plan that we are not aware of. Okay? And life at some point will take us to where we logically must arrive, according to life's logic, not according to your logic or mine. So I think you got to learn to trust the process of life. So thank you. I think that was very powerfully shared by you. I'll come to some nuts and bolts part of it. So these are two large questions I had on the personal process. How do you deal with the anger part? Was there anger with a system that is in some way dysfunctional? I'm talking about the aviation industry, the technology around it, perhaps, I don't know the details, but perhaps the politics around it. Since you have followed it very closely, especially in the case of MH370, how do you personally deal with the anger within you? Because what happened to you was none of your fault, right? And so you feel that I didn't deserve this. How do you deal with such a situation?
Okay. I belong to a school which believes that anger is not necessarily a bad thing, or that it's a problem. Like anything else, anger is energy, and so sometimes one likens it to fire, and I can use fire to do many meaningful, creative things, or I can just jump into it and kill myself. So I think the point was that yes, anger I think has been a subterranean, continuous, raging feature. Yeah, I don't think I've been angry with the world for something that happened to me. I don't think that has ever been the source. But that things that could have been done didn't get done in the early days of the search. I think they goofed. What was worse was, I think, that there was no owning up that things were goofed up. There were cover-ups. I think possibly there are concerns with liability and stuff like that, which in a way glosses over things and masks the reality, the truth. And so I've been very angry with a lot of that. Yeah. But what it did for me, I think, is that it got me out of a preoccupation with myself. I think I got a lot more actively involved with rallying other families around to try and see what one can do to nudge governments to take the search to its logical conclusion, and be available to other families in a way to share, to ask of each other what was happening to our own lives, and things like that, which was, to my mind, a lot more constructive way of deploying this anger. Yeah, and to us and to many other families, this anger and its expression is critical to signal to the world that it's an event that cannot be so quickly forgotten.
Okay.
That it's extremely important, not just for the 239 families, but for people at large, people who travel, people in this business, people in aviation, yeah, to not let it fade away into memory, fade away from memory, into history, as an unsolved mystery, as something that's not been understood. Because there is an inherent danger here. there is an issue that keeps the possibility of a recurrence. So it's very critical for us, not just for our comfort and our closure, but for a lot more people around the world, that we find what really happened. And so it's anger which I think fuels a lot of what we try and do, but it's an anger that's accompanied by inquiry. It's anger that's accompanied by a certain perseverance. And I think beyond the point, it's not personal. Anger has over the months, moved to something a lot more angsty about the ways of the world.
Fantastic. What I'm picking up is that all life situations do deliver to us quite subconsciously a sense of purpose. I don't think I want to elaborate on the anger part of it. I think he's done it so beautifully. This is exactly what Osho always says, that anger is just energy, and if you channelize it, I don't think if we all started thinking anger was a bad thing, I don't think we would have got independence. Because a man got thrown out of a railway compartment, it's his anger that with the system that got us independence. So I think anger is extremely constructive, and Naren, full marks, salute you for, despite the upheaval that your family's been through, for you to have been able to channelize your anger. But what I'm picking up is that this anger delivers to people at different times in life a sense of purpose. And a sense of purpose is something that you indulge in, that you flow with rather, not just for yourself. And he again articulated that so beautifully in terms of wanting to ensure that the incident does not go into history as one more data point and remains in the public consciousness in the form of a completely avoidable tragedy, which must not happen again to another set of people. So I'm reminded, in fact, of a very famous case that many of you may also recollect. A medical college student, Aman Kachru, was ragged in 2009 in Himachal Pradesh and murdered. His father, Professor Kachru, lived in Tanzania. The whole family lived in Tanzania, and they moved to Delhi, lock, stock and barrel, after Aman Kachru died, in order to work on getting a anti-ragging law passed in Indian Parliament. And finally, I think in 2014, the law was passed, which deals with the death penalty for people indulging in ragging on campuses. So I remember watching Barkha Dutt in conversation with Professor Kachru, and she, in an inimitable journalistic fashion, asking, "So what's the big deal, Professor Kachru? You got the bill passed, but you gave up your life in Tanzania, and you came to India, and you did all this. None of this is going to bring your son back." And he replied, "In my son's passing, I found my life's purpose. The anger that was boiling within me, I diverted it to feed that purpose. So the bill and whatever further action," he's still not given up. He still says it must be tighter. Whatever further action will happen on the bill is my way of giving back to create a better world. And that's what I can sense from what you're doing. Really, really commendable. I want to ask you one more question before we open up to the audience, which is, when you are dealing with all of this, there is a support that comes from family and from friends, right? And there is a part of you which is also the professional that you are, where in your case, you're a consultant, you work with many companies. Which of these strands did you cling on to personally in order to kind of navigate this phase, and you're still navigating it in some sense? Which of these worked better for you, or did you go with anything that came your way? Any thoughts on that?
I'll take a couple of minutes.
Please, please, please.
One, I've been fairly blessed with a number of friends who offered themselves unconditionally in terms of their time, their availability, and their willingness to receive whatever was thrown at them in the early days and subsequently. So, in many ways, I've lived my life largely in the company of friends. And like most of us, families have been what we have taken for granted. Yeah? And that brings me to the second point that I was going to say, which is that I, over the last couple of years, have discovered how much that the family means to me. My immediate family, which is my sisters, my mother, they have been invaluable, both in terms of being available when sought and being around when not asked. And I think both have lent me a certain level of comfort, a certain assurance that even at times when I felt alone, when I was alone, I was never lonely. And when I had to reach out to somebody, I could always pick up 10 names in an instant. So across the period of 2 years, there have been any number of people who have come out from years of absence to reach out and to come up and get in touch and to be available. So they have been very important. And net, my own belief has also been that actually one is never alone. To be alone is a matter of choice. I don't think it is so much a matter of circumstance. And I've chosen to be alone at times, and which I think is important too, to not dissipate and not to run away and not to hide or to not to pretend, but to simply stare at the reality of what is happening to me in all its darkness, all alone. And I think that's important too.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That triggers a thought for me that, when we are asked to talk about personal leadership, the way I understand it always is see the reality first. You could be in any situation and you may hate the reality, but see it. Don't run away from it. When you see the reality, you have two choices in front of you. Working to fixing that reality, if you can. Now, in Naren's case, or in my case and Vani's case, the inability to fix the reality for me and Vani over the current tenure of time, it's impossible for us to fix it the way we are looking at it in terms of the time that's elapsed and the time that lies ahead of us, at least as far as a human eye can see it. So when you can't fix a problem, when you can't fix the reality, learn to accept it. It helps you deal with it better. You may not find a solution, but your ability to deal with a problem or a reality or a new reality is several times better with acceptance. This has been our learning. So leadership, I would say, is seeing reality, going to work on that, on changing that reality if you can, and if you can't change that reality, accepting it gracefully. That is an important aspect of leadership. Would you agree? Acceptance plays a big role?
Absolutely. If I can just add to what you're saying, when I think about what you were just saying, I think uncertainty does 2-3 things. One, it offers the opportunity to rediscover faith in yourself, rediscover resources in yourself that perhaps you were never aware of, and gives you a certain resilience to know that no matter what your response is and how it's received, It doesn't have to be the last, and it doesn't have to be the worst. And that there will always be another time. And it's inborn in us as human beings, this facet of resilience.
True.
The second thing that I want to also say is that I think uncertainty also throws in front of you the opportunity to make a choice of the kind of future that you choose to create. Because there are no answers. There is no book that tells you what to do. And so therefore it's an opportunity to create a world, a future, which has you as the author, actually. And however good or bad it turns out to be, it's still yours. And it tells you, take responsibility for whatever choice that you make and the world that you create. And I think to me that's both a great invitation. It's also a very daunting, scary prospect.
I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. The past that we have lived has brought us to the present. And at this moment, we are seeding our future. So that's the choice that he's talking about. You have a choice to seed that future the way you want it to manifest. And again, it's a daunting prospect, as he says, because what if your choice is wrong? But if you go by the dialogue from Sholay, the jo dar gaya samjho mar gaya, so you can't be scared of those choices. You have to make a choice, and at least through discovering yourself better, through the whole process of finding yourself, you're probably more confident of the wanting a future which you are beginning to imagine, visualize for yourself. So thank you for that. So I will at this point take questions from the audience. We've had a fairly interesting conversation here. MKC has got the first question over here. Sir, inge mic kudunga front la. Can we pass around the mic? So please ask a very direct question. If you're going to observe something, keep it for offline so that we manage time better.
Yeah, thanks, Naren. First of all, I take a bow for your kind of composure and balance, that you have shown in this. I know what it takes to, go through this kind of a process. My question to you is that while you very clearly said that there were friends, people around you who took care of you, in such situations, people tend to go overboard emotionally, right? You might have a huge amount of rationale behind you, but people around you can be emotional, and they can, lead you to a state of self-pity. Yeah. Now, while I take it that Mr. Naren has enough amount of composure to take it, how did your daughter deal with that? And how, as a leader or as a parent, you had to intervene for your daughter?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Actually, vis-a-vis my daughter, I think I've had it fairly easy, because she was with me in Chennai for 2 weeks and then had to go to college in Delhi. She studies in Delhi. She's doing a graduation there. So she was back in college in her paying guest accommodation 2 weeks after March of 8th, 2014. So in some ways, being away and being in the midst of her own friends was helpful. I do believe that marriages and deaths bring out the best and the worst in people. Yeah, invariably. Both occasions are, full of mirth and joy, and also stresses and tension. So we have had people who've had notions about how we should be responding to the situation, how we should grieve, how we should process our feelings. We've had people come to us with suggestions, recommendations, expectations. the fact remains, as I said, I was describing my daughter a little earlier. She has a way of very beautifully, passively resisting unnecessary, uncalled for demands. I have that too. And I think we have, in this process, tried in a way to be true to actually how we felt, be respectful of how others felt, but be very clear on drawing a line. When demands are made about how we should feel or how we should respond. I don't know if I've answered your question, sir.
Thank you.
I have read between the lines.
Next question, please. Anybody with a question? Yes, sir.
Actually, you said that when you were facing this crisis, I mean, during that period, you have chosen for a new, some kind of work, like writing. So, if we are breaking the routine, just I am comparing with my own small experience. When I am breaking the routine and I am starting a new work or a new thing into my life, always I think what made me to do the change? What made me to do the change? So always when I am executing this new work, it is always reminding me the root cause. So I was not used to that, now I am forced to do that. I was not used to that, now I am forced to that. So having a new thing for superseding some other thing, itself again it is relating me again and again and again. So for in my case, I try to do some kind of yoga, meditation, but I never used to do that. But when I started to do something new, again it is taking me back to that thinking, that thought process. So just I want to know, at least for my own benefit, so can you explain during that first phase of first 2 days, 3 days of writing, whether you had the similar kind of issues? So, thank you.
Okay. Firstly, I think I started writing because I wanted to write. I love writing. All right? And now I discovered that I had a lot of time on hand. I wasn't keeping myself busy with work. So I had enough time at hand. And since as I said, since it was a passion for me, it was not a chore, it wasn't a task. All right? That's one. The second thing is any such event, any disruption, the inevitable thing about it is that it demands of you a certain reconfiguration of a number of things. Yeah? Sure, you can never forget what has occasioned this reconfiguration. I've had to reconfigure my life. I've had to reconfigure the purpose of why I exist all over again. I have to reconfigure my relationships. I have to reconfigure what it means now to talk about in-laws without the presence of my wife. Because her being around and my relationship with her is the basis on which I construe a whole social contract with that family. So I have to understand now, what does it mean? Yeah, so there are any number of things which require a reconfiguration. Some is done, a lot of it is fairly incomplete. And I have to remind myself that what I'm picking up from what you're saying is somewhere that you seem almost a little unwilling or a reluctant customer as you set out to do something. With me, what I tried doing is something that I like doing. But I will also talk about one or two things, for instance, which are fairly mundane, which still bother me. I have to get up in the morning at 6:30 every morning to make coffee for my mother. Yeah? Now, it wasn't what I was used to doing. But if I don't get up by 6:30, she's calling me on my cell phone from her room. She can't walk very much, so she will call. So many mornings don't wake up in a very pleasant, happy situation. I would like to do it for her, but I still grudge the fact that I have to be woken up and then to get on with life to start with making a cup of coffee. It irks me, but it doesn't matter. These are small things. And just carry on.
I'd like to add one point there. You also talked about the first few days. That is the joy of trying to anchor your mind. So my advice to you, persist with yoga and meditation, because the mind will think up thoughts. That's the job of the mind. And as long as the mind is steeped in the dead past or racing towards the unborn future, it will always be in a turmoil. And the process of yoga or meditation, and meditation has got many forms, you can try many forms and choose the one that works for you. The job of meditation is really to help you anchor your mind in the present moment. And when you reach, my stage of clarity, hopefully, I have struggled through that process for many years to come to where I am. In the present, there is no mind. You are just engaged in the present. So when you are in the present moment, then there is no worry of the future and there is no pain of the past. It's just this, what is there in the now. You'll get there. You look much, much younger than both of us here, so you'll get there. So he had a very practical, I had a very spiritual perspective. So, yes, sir. Vijay, yes.
I just wanted to add, if you want to have a bath without getting wet, it's not going to work.
Well said, well said.
Which has happened to you. You have not, of course, you lost your wife, but you have not seen her dead till now. So, losing someone in such kind of uncommon tragedies, mass tragedies, hijackings, etc. Yes, I think is the grievance even more felt than when you lose someone nearby. Okay, this is my first question. And second is, when something very strange or very different happens to you, which has not happened to others, I would consider it as a privilege, even though it's a tragedy. So it happens because for a reason, either for you to share something to the world, or either for you to refine yourself in a better way. So in that two aspects, have you felt the difference between yesterday and today, after the accident, after the incident?
Sure.
I think his first question is about closure.
I understand. Okay. I don't know if I'm responding to the first one clearly enough, but sure, I don't know whether she's dead or not. I have to conclude that she has passed away. Yeah? And I lost my father when I was 17. It's not as if it's something that I'm not accustomed to, that people around me will go, one day it will be my turn. So that's a given. What I sometimes also draw a certain comfort, not comfort really, but a certain sense of balance about things, is when I look at what is happening around. 200 girls in Nigeria were kidnapped somewhere in the last 15 months, and there is not a trace. I think that bothers me, that shocks me, that leaves me very sad. I think perhaps even more sad than the loss of my wife. Teenage girls, 400 odd children drowned due to some stupidity of a captain of a ferry in Korea. That was unacceptable. That bothers me. Again, school kids. So, there is death, there is destruction, there is loss, there is lives snatched away all around us in large numbers, in sometimes in very horrific ways. So I think that gives me a certain perspective about what it is to lose and what it is to live. I think that also gives me an idea of the fact that rather than bemoan the loss, what we do with the life that we have is perhaps more important. That's the second question. I'm exceptional, as he called, because of the situation that I'm in, not because of who I am, but my circumstance is very different today. I'm uncommon for that reason. Out of billions of people in the world, only 239 families have lost somebody in an air crash that is still not understood. So I am very uncommon.
I have not met you before.
Yes.
How have you changed after that?
How have I changed? I'm more at ease today, being on television, writing to the press, sitting here and talking to you. I've learned. I have a feeling I've learned, not consciously. So this is one way that I have had to perhaps equip myself to be able to make a point across to very diverse sets of people about very different issues. That's one most obvious thing that I can think of at this point in time. Yeah? I can go on, but...
Fantastic answer, fantastic. Thank you for that question, and thank you for the answer. I think we can take two more questions, just two more, last two. One from Ramesh, and then we'll come to Varadarajan.
In the face of the grim reality in which you have been pushed to, having come from a very traditional conservative background, may I ask you as to how the so-called obsequies and other ritualistic stuff was handled by the people in your family, you, the immediate family around you? How was it done? Because we have never come across a situation, at least in our lifetimes, like this, very strange one. And number two, how has the legal process of getting the bank accounts, properties, this shares, securities, all those things getting transferred in the absence of a medical certificate or a death certificate or hardship certificate and all that stuff, which even for an ordinary normal death itself is a big thing to do. Sure. How did you go about handling these things by which could be a lesson to the 200 people over here?
Okay. Thank you. I don't know the date when she died. I don't know the time of her death. I don't know the manner of her dying. All right? So, and I don't think we have, as a family, why did I say I don't think? We have not done anything. You assume that I'm from a conservative family, I grant you that. Yeah? But regardless, what is typically part and parcel of an Indian Hindu household, we have had no occasion to do anything. All right? So that's one. As far as other things that follow, it's a work in progress. I don't even have a single document from Malaysia or from the government of India which says she is no more. As yet. I've been chasing a death certificate with the government of Malaysia for the last 10 months. All right? And so, in the absence of any document, and of course the government of India is clueless, they're invisible, they're absolutely invisible, inaccessible, and it doesn't matter. You're not dealing with large numbers here, you're dealing with 5 Indian passengers, 5 and belonging to 3 families. I don't think they count. So there's nothing from here. So as it stands now, I pursue Malaysia vigorously, And I'm assuming that in this financial year, we will settle many things. I was harassed by a credit card company because my wife's credit card bill had not got honored, something like that, initially. But the reality was that her bills were going to her email account, which I had no access to. But the collection agent would drop into the house every 2 weeks. So we've been through some harassment of this kind. And yeah, bank accounts, insurance, credit cards, NSCs, land, house, many of these are very wide open issues that hopefully will start getting settled, addressed in the coming months. I'm optimistic that sometime in this month I would have at least some paper from Malaysia. Just keep in mind that there are families still who believe their passengers are alive somewhere. All right? It's a taboo subject to talk about a death certificate amongst many families. Okay? Not everybody has applied for one. All right? So, there are sensitivities in this vis-a-vis other families. I don't know if I've answered your question, I hope.
Varadarajan, your last question? No, it's working.
I must really thank Narendran and also thank Service for, and especially Mr. Service to give me this last opportunity to ask this question on a wonderful subject that we are talking about. Not really wonderful in the sense the incident, but the learning part of it. My question is pretty simple and probably very well towards the end. You have talked about the practical element of dealing with crisis, and a crisis of this nature which is so magnanimous in that sense and so out of ordinary. But what about the spiritual and the religious angle, where generally when you go through such crisis as a normal human being, you tend to become religious more than what you are at the present and become spiritual in the longer shorter term. So what went through you and your family or your family on the religious and the spiritual part of it, not really on the philosophical, because we already touched that part quite a bit. But I would like to know more about from the religious and the spiritual.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. I have a very short answer to this question. It's a large question, but I'll have a short answer. I'm not religious at all. All right? I'm concerned with what happens in this life, on this earth, for now. What will happen to me in the other worlds, whichever it is that I go to, neither can I be bothered right now, nor is it my priority. So, I do believe that there are forces beyond the so-called rational scientific, and that there is a larger intelligence. But let that do its job and I'll do mine.
Fantastic. Thank you for asking that question, and thank you for your answer. So just to do a quick wrap, I'd like to add to that point. I think we must understand the distinction between religion and spirituality. And spirituality is the flowering of inner awareness. It's what he is doing, what we've all learned to do. And religion makes it very ritualistic and makes it very fear-boding. You're instilled with fear or injected with fear so that you succumb to certain ritualistic processes. And I think when dealing especially with disruptive change, that's the last thing that you want, to be fearful. I think you have to be, Stoicism requires that you stay engaged with the present and face the reality, face up to the reality. You wanted to add?
Just wanted to add one thing. I don't know if I'm spiritual or religious, but I do believe that what's important is faith. And faith has nothing, according to me, to do with both. It has simply to do with a certain belief, a conviction, and a certain awareness of your own inner resources, and that it is there at all times, and it's up to us to invoke it and to bring it forth. And I think, to me, faith is a lot more important.
Faith in yourself, that if you've been created, you will journey along no matter what the circumstances. So change is happening to all of us at a slow pace, at a disruptive pace, and the slow pace, we don't even notice it. For example, at a very very high level, as we speak, continents are drifting closer to each other and oceans are disappearing. Where the Himalayas stands today was the Tetlis Sea many million years ago. And as we speak, every 7 years, the cells in the human body die and new cells are replaced. That's science, that's basic biology. And that's a change that we don't notice. And yet we grapple with change. It's happening within us, in our bodies, and yet we grapple and struggle with change. So I think listening to Naren talk about it, having dealt with disruptive change ourselves, I would just say, whatever be the source of change, whatever be the cause of change, accept it, just accept it. Have an open mind. I think it opens up million possibilities to what he called recalibrating the situation, recalibrating the connections, the relationships, the opportunities. So have an open mind, and remember, whatever be your ecosystem, and he's blessed with one, I am blessed with one, you're blessed with one, whatever be your ecosystem, only you have to deal with it. You're part of the change, only you have to deal with it. And that's where leadership comes in. And that's where this very beautiful attribute, quality, feature that we all have resident in us, resilience, counts. Resilience, I say often, is like Bluetooth on your smartphone. Unless you activate it, it's not going to work for you. And one of the byproducts of going through disruptive change is that the resilience in you kicks in. And it's your resilient new self that begins to deal with newer realities. So, thank you. Thank you, Naren. I think this is a very energizing conversation. I know it must have been particularly traumatic visiting some of those times again in order to share it with us, but thank you for being here and sharing it with us.
Thank you.
Let me invite Suresh from MMA, President and CEO of India Cements Capital, to give his closing remarks.
Good evening to all of you. Mr. Naren and Mr. AVIS, I think it's a wonderful evening for all of us. Those who missed definitely will feel for that. In fact, I should have missed actually because of some work in the office. Luckily, my friend who has come here, Basu, called me and said, today there is a talk in MMA. Then I rushed. Really, I'm fortunate. In fact, I was really feeling very bad about the incident which happened to you, sir. I think all of you know that life, I think Mr. AVIS also said very clearly that life is a travel without knowing what are the turns, what are the curves, which we don't know. Actually, we have to travel without knowing that. So that uncertainty is there always. But this type of tragedy or trauma is of very high order. I mean, it calls for a lot of emotional balance. I mean, you have to counter yourself. First, you have to feel about yourself, how to come out of that. I think example is Chakravyuha in Mahabharata. I think you know, Abhimanyu got into Chakravyuha, how to come out of that. So like that, he was in midst of this problem, but I think he has shown lot of things we learned today. One first thing is that how to face it or how to deal with the situation and what are the steps you should take. I think he has put it beautifully, even how to recalibrate. There's the word he used, recalibrate or reconfigure yourself with respect to your relatives, with respect to yourself. I mean, it is not that easy. Even I have gone through in my earlier part of my life such an incident which really, make your life miserable. I mean, you can't tolerate or you can't be silent for even a minute without, it is coming back and coming back. That's what he said. Unsettled questions will come back like a ghost. That's what he used, that word. Beautiful word. So, in a life, yes, everyone will have some problem, this or that, but how to come out of that? One of them, idea is that please accept the reality. I think that's the final thing what we have said that. I think, sir, you made all of us to learn, rather take away so many things because of your cool, composed talk, and Mr. Avis also done a marvelous one-to-one interaction with you, and we are with you, sir, for all your endeavors to come. Thank you. Now, on behalf of MMA, we would like to give small moment to Mr. Narendran.
Thank you, members, for being such a very patient audience. Look forward to see you all in the next event, which is on 24th at the same hall. Thank you. Wish you a safe drive. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.